Hello, welcome. My wife asked me a question, and I thought I would answer it for her. The question was, how do you go about creating characters after you've come up with a world, a concept, whatever? And I thought this was a good question. I thought it was interesting to spring off of that. So, when it comes to world building, I like to use the kind of Brandon Sanderson method where you dig deep into a few topics or one topic, you get really invested in it, and you really do a cursory world building over other things, just kind of for flavor. And you dig deep into one thing. And I find that when you dig deep into one thing, you're going to find places that characters can fill. Because if you're developing a world, there are going to be people that exist in that world. Well, people or animals, I guess, or some sort of aliens, I guess. But when you're building up a world, you're going to start uncovering stories that you can tell, and it's sort of a matter of deciding which stories you want to tell or what aspects of the world do you want to explore. I thought a good way to go about this would be maybe to discuss some of the stories that I've written and talk about how the character concepts came to be and how they were fleshed out a little. So I have many comics, and I think I'll focus on two of them that I like that are very heavy in world building, and that would be the Books of Avo and The Scourge of Nine Points, because those are my big fantasy world building stories. There's also Crow Story, but you guys don't know any of the characters in Crow Story, so it's not that great. You can't read Crow Story, it's not out yet, basically. So when it came to the Books of Avo, it's a little unique because there's always been characters for me to pull from the Books of Avo, because I started writing it when I was 12 years old, so it always had characters in it. But I think the philosophy, even at the age of 12, the philosophy of the Books of Avo really stands testament to this kind of world building thing. Let me explain this better. So when I was first writing it, it was kind of a ripoff of Ocarina of Time, and I like the concept of sages, right? So the sages were all different roles that I needed to fulfill in my comic, well, my book. But in my story, I needed the 6 sages, so I developed characters out from that. Those were roles that I wanted to fulfill. And even in doing so in the more modern versions of the story, that's a lot of what is done, is I got really invested in the pantheon of Avo. There's a lot of other smaller aspects to the world, the more 1920s type stuff, but I was always invested in the mythology of the world, and the mythology lends for creating characters very easily, and it's just a matter of choosing which characters I want to follow, because there's the 7 gods in the world, there's these 6 sages, there's the 70 spirits that exist, and picking and choosing and following which stories interest me. I think that's the big point, is finding characters that both interest you and will explain and expand the story. So the main character of the Books of Avo isn't in the pantheon, isn't a sage. She's Juliet. She's a human lady, and she's kind of a bridge point, an entry point into the world of immortals, because it's one of those, it's not completely an urban fantasy type story where everything is separate, but there's definitely a human society, and then the immortal society, there's dragons, there's all sorts of nonsense like that, and creating Juliet was an important thing in telling the story. So finding an interesting lady, human, entry point into the fantastical world of immortals in order to ground it was an important thing. And creating a romance story between her and a dragon, who is also the Sage of Fire, which starts bringing us into the larger implications of the story, is kind of what's important. When creating the different characters that I wanted to explore in the Books of Avo, I wanted to make sure to include a vast array of the different fantasy races, so that we could explore the different aspects of society that I had fleshed out. Like we got Aaron, who's like an exiled angel, and he has his whole story, his background, and it's also a background that still links him to the major plot, the things going on with the gods, the pantheon, etc. And then we got Feria, who brings us into the world of dragons, but she has her own unique thing going on. Adding personality is kind of like your own special little step. But like each character, if you're building a world, you should be able to fit them within a world, find which roles you want to fulfill to tell the stories you want to tell. And if you don't know the story that you want to tell specifically yet, think about what aspects of the story are interesting to you, what parts of the world do you want to explore? I personally find it difficult to world build without creating some sort of narrative. Because when you're telling histories of your world, when you're telling how things came to be, you are creating story, you are creating narrative. Mythology is narrative, right? So finding your place within that is important. So Juliet is a very entry point character that sets up this modern, well, not modern, 1920s human world, and then we have all these characters interacting within it. I wanted ancient beings to be existing in 1920 society, so like brainstorming that sort of stuff is how all of it came to be. Moving on to the Scourge of Ninepoint. So creating the Scourge of Ninepoint, it had a very solid basis for a story that I wanted to tell. It was the story of a calico who lives in the society that oppresses calicos, and he escapes persecution when he is a baby by being raised by a family of raccoons. And I then sort of fleshed out the world around it. I made a world that was based around like the colors of cat fur and how that like has different powers. And if you want to hear all about it, I have a whole video going into the entirety of Ninepoint. I think I have 2 videos specifically. But when it came to making characters, it was that same kind of principle where I've created this world. There's going to be roles that obviously exist, and in order to showcase them, I need to create characters within like the different scenarios that I've created. So I want characters that come from the wildlands who are not cats. You know, I need to make raccoons, and I need to flesh out the raccoon society. So I have his dad, who is in a gang with some other raccoons. I have his mom and some of her village friends. And then we have Marble, the main character, and creating a story around him and him discovering his like identity as not actually being a raccoon. Like that's a whole story that can be found within it. And then because there's this larger world that I obviously want to explore, I added Mitzi, who is a training knight, a knight in training. She's a page at the very beginning of the story, and she's kind of used as a lens for us to explore the kingdom, the empire of Ninepoint, and her naive like outlook on the story is showcased in like her youth, and it helps like kind of just explore like what cats are like rather than just seeing it entirely from Marble's lens, you know. And then creating her into a character, giving her motivation, flaws, and fleshing her out from there is kind of like what's important and like how she came to be. And her story kind of like speaks for itself. Her motivation is she wants to become a knight. She wants to be the very best. In doing so, she's going to learn what it means to be a knight, right? Similarly, I was interested in exploring the royal family. Their origins end up being kind of important to the story. And I also wanted to add a blue-eyed white cat because that's like a unique power system as well, and there's also a lot of stuff that I want to do in the spirit world, and the white cats are connected to the spirit world. So adding a white cat who is also royalty allows me to like have a look into both sides of the story. I developed the king and queen, but the thing is, like, I think personally it can be easy to look at a character like the princess and be like, oh, she's a princess, but she's also like in tune with the spirit world, and now her life is changing because she's now has to go to like the temple in the scary spirit world that is like overrun with monsters, and like there's like inherently place for story within that, because when you build a world, like you should be creating tension and uncertainty within it, be thinking about like what needs to be resolved. I think that would be my final point, is that if you're having trouble creating characters within your story and giving them like any sort of like action or whatever, and I don't think you inherently need to do this, but try to add more tension to your world, add more points of flux, add more uncertainty, things that need explored, need understood. Leave things open for your character to like unravel them. Leave holes in your world building for you to explore them through character, because if you're someone who enjoys creating worlds, like it can kind of get boring having characters interacting in them and doing boring things. Tell the story of someone interesting, you know? Create a world in flux. And if you're having a lot of trouble, sometimes what can help is to go back to like the history portions that you're writing and just write a story about when things were changing. You can end up writing a story. You can end up building a world that's like set. Like, you build a world, right? And you talk about how everything ends up happening. And then you're like, this is such a cool world. But then you have, like, nothing to do in it. Go back to before it became this cool world. Go to the points of flux, the points of war that changed everything. Focus in on those points, because that's where you can find something, like, interesting and unique, you know? Other than that, it's easy to find small stories in a world, because like a world can just be a backdrop, right? Like if you're not actually delving into the more higher tier aspects of world building, if you're just writing about characters existing in a society, like that is completely possible. But you just have to think smaller, and you have to pull back on world building, basically. You can build a whole bunch of world building and just never reference it, and just keep it in your heart and soul. Like, that's fine to do as well. So yeah, that's my advice for creating characters from your world building endeavors. I hope that helps. And if you want to share your world building with other people and gab and stuff, I have a Discord. And there's all sorts of people in there who talk about their comics and love sharing world building things. And if you think your world building stuff would be a good example for like a video or something, you can also submit that to my video question section, all on the Discord. It's all hopefully self-explanatory, except the cat economy. Speaking of world building, the cat economy is elusive, and I will not be explaining it right now. You'll just have to go to the Discord and find out. Anyways, goodbye. See you guys in the next one.